he slapped Chris Rock. They say Smith refused. The new details come as the Academy acknowledged it could have handled what it calls a deeply shocking and traumatic situation differently. And they had a message for Chris Rock. Here is what it is. They say, Mr. Rock, we apologize to you for what you experienced on our stage and thank you for your resilience in that moment. As for Will Smith, the Academy has begun disciplinary proceedings. Thanks so much for joining us. AC 360 starts now.
Good evening. Tonight in Ukraine, skepticism about a claimed Russian military drawdown has turned to defiance, and doubts about the peace process have been replaced by outright scorn.
Yes, we have negotiations process, but they're only words, without anything concrete. There are other words about alleged pullback of Russian troops from Kyiv and Chernihiv and reduction of activities of the occupiers in these territories. This is not a retreat. This is the result of the work of our defenders who pushed them back.
Only words, he says. As for the claimed cutback in military operations around Kyiv and Chernihiv in the north, strikes continued today on the outskirts in Kyiv. Also in Chernihiv, whose mayor says the city is under, quote, colossal attack. Whatever drawdown was supposed to happen, it seems it's yet to materialize. What's more, according to the Pentagon, Russia is merely repositioning troops, not bringing them home. And on top of that, officials today agreed with reports that their commander-in-chief, Vladimir Putin, is not being kept fully in the loop.
On the reports of Putin not being well advised, I'm going to be careful here not to getting into intelligence, but we would concur with the conclusion that Mr. Putin has not been fully informed by his Ministry of Defense at every turn over the last month.
Well, whatever Vladimir Putin is or is not being told, he's certainly well aware of Russian tactics, which include targeting residential areas. The video you're about to see of a kindergarten was taken by a woman who lives in Kharkiv. She describes destruction from a Russian rocket attack.
This is the sleeping room where children were sleeping. And it was on fire because the Russian rocket hit this exact room right here on this wall. The nearby residential houses are also heavily destroyed.
We do not have any more information, we should point out, on the results of that reported strike. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office today said that 145 children have been killed since the invasion began. And according to UNICEF, 2 million Ukrainian children have been forced to find safety outside the country, with another 2.5 million now internally displaced. In addition, attacks continue on humanitarian facilities. There's a new satellite photo of a damaged Red Cross warehouse in Mariupol. The building, as you can see, is clearly marked from the sky. It was hit by at least 2 separate strikes. Just ahead on the program tonight, I'm going to talk with Cindy McCain, ambassador to the UN's Food and Agriculture Agencies in Rome. We begin, though, tonight with CNN Chief International Anchor Christiane Amanpour in Kyiv. Christiane, what is the latest there tonight?
Well, look, there's no sense that Kyiv itself is under any assault, as we know, but it has been a lot of fighting outside on the outskirts, including the little town of Brovary, which has been hit twice in the last week, and I was there just earlier today. Missiles have struck the town of Brovary, a suburb of eastern Kyiv, twice in the last week alone. This tangled, jagged mass of metal and cladding is what's left of a massive warehouse that stored food, paper, and the beer and alcohol that's no longer allowed to be consumed under martial law. This happened at almost exactly the same time that the Russians were announcing their de-escalation around Kyiv. This missile struck right here. Imagine the good fortune of the truck driver who was loading up to take crates and packages and boxes of food and supplies to the supermarkets in this town and also to Kyiv. He managed to survive. We are told 3 workers were killed, but Brovary has never fallen to Russian forces. Directly west of here, Russian and Ukrainian troops have been fiercely fighting over the town of Irpin, and now it does appear that the Russians are retreating from here. A clear indication that this war around Kyiv has simply not gone the way Russia planned. Whatever the reason, Moscow says it's retrenching. Their intercepted radio conversations, verified by the New York Times, show their soldiers in distress from the very start.
Мне необходима остро дозаправка, вода, продукты. Я тебе на прием.
This was west of the capital in Makariv in the very first days of the war, already signaling the focus on civilians once their own so-called properties were out of harm's way.
Принято решение убрать первое хозяйство от населенного пункта и накрыть населенный пункт артиллерией. Прием.
This security video shows a Russian armored vehicle just blowing up a car, instantly killing the elderly couple inside. Ukraine has lost its fighters too. Here in the Brovary cemetery, Boris the caretaker shows us freshly dug graves. This guy, this soldier died on the very first day of the war.
Да.
It's raining, it's drizzling here today. It's almost as if this city is crying as it mourns its war dead, because all of these graves are for the fighters of this place who've fallen in combat since this war began. This grave has been dug, but the family can't yet bury their son, a soldier who was fighting in a village 15 kilometers away, but's held by the Russians. They haven't yet been able to get his body released. And even Boris's heart breaks when he tells me about a father who's just lost his son, his only child, and who asked, "What do I have to live for now?"
Christian, that audio that the New York Times analyzed, it's so fascinating to listen to the full audio stream that they report on. It signals the Russian troops have been struggling from the start, and also that they're using open radio frequencies which are able to be picked up by anybody who has the right technology.
Well, exactly, and that is part of their whole sort of basic distress in the field, which has led to them not achieving their goals on the ground. And that's one of the reasons why all of this muddle came out from Moscow yesterday, to have them sort of, retrench and regroup. So we don't really know exactly how that's going to play out, but certainly the head of British intelligence has just delivered a speech in Australia in which he says that clearly Putin has been completely misinformed about the capacity of his own troops, but not only that, that they have, they know that troops have deserted, that have left their vehicles, that refuse to follow orders, and in one case at least have brought down their own aircraft. They fired and brought down a Russian aircraft. And then the other thing on that audio is that from the start, they talked about laying down artillery fire against residential areas. I mean, from the start.
And yeah, and you can actually hear them in the tank operator saying specifically residential areas. Right. In a call today, President Biden told President Zelensky he would provide more budgetary aid to Ukraine. What's Zelensky asking other leaders for?
Well, look, he desperately needs help. Clearly, as the US says and NATO say, one of the reasons it's not just the heart, the spirit, and the resistance of the Ukrainian fighters, which is key, but it is also the training and all the help, materiel, weaponry, all of that they've been getting to fight this fight. But they need more. And Zelensky spoke, he's done a tour of world parliaments by Zoom remotely, and today it was to Norway. And he called for a lot more weapons, the kind of weapons you need to take out tanks, aircraft, and even he wanted, weapons to take out ships. He's very, very concerned about all that, and particularly Mariupol, which we all know is just suffering the brunt of all of this. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Christian Amanpour, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now my conversation with a member of Ukrainian Parliament, Lysia Vasilenko, quoting from her two recent tweets. In one, she writes, "Russia saying it will remove forces and Russia actually removing forces are two very different things. Kyiv is still loud, and the west of Ukraine still goes to sleep with the sounds of sirens." She also wrote on Peace Talk, she tweeted, "The key point from Ukraine, all negotiations possible only after total deoccupation of Ukraine, so Russian soldiers go home and then we talk." I spoke to her just before airtime. Ms. Vasylenko, I appreciate you joining us. As you know, heavy fighting continues on the outskirts of Kyiv despite the announced drawdown of Russian forces. Is there any reason to believe that Russia is negotiating in good faith?
For us Ukrainians, there's no reason to believe that, because we have had time and time again evidence when Putin has said one thing and then did the complete opposite. We have learned to apply the reverse psychology principle to Putin's words. So when he says one thing, he usually means something absolutely different. So what we are witnessing is when he said he's going to go into phase 2 and now concentrate on just the eastern parts of Ukraine, on that same day he sent out missile after missile into west of Ukraine. That's thousands of kilometers which separate the two areas out. Today, well, not today, yesterday I was leaving Kiev. I'm now actually just arrived in Paris for another bout of diplomatic talks with partners in France, but it took me 36 hours to actually get here. And as I was crossing the whole of the country at night, especially, the whole sky lights up in every single region, several times per night, and during the day as well. This is what Putin's peace talks and ceasefire is all about.
One gets messages from Russians involved in negotiations say that there has been signs of some sort of progress, and then from Moscow, directly from Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, you hear essentially the opposite, saying there's no signs of any progress.
Well, negotiations have been going on since day one, literally, of this escalation of the war of Russian aggression against Ukraine. There are negotiations on many topics. Humanitarian corridors, evacuation, food deliveries, all sorts of things, troops movement across the country and along the borders. But at the end of the day, what the world is really interested in and what everyone is asking about is when will there be a full ceasefire? When will this stop? When will there be peace in Europe and the world? And essentially, there are no answers for that, because Russia and Putin are simply not interested in having peace, and they are not interested in having peace in a diplomatic way. The only thing that can stop Putin's aggression is a united international effort that will be bigger than Russia's force, and that will actually kick Putin out of Ukraine and restrain him inside the territory of Russia.
I'm wondering what you make of this new reporting that U.S. intelligence officials believe that Vladimir Putin has been misinformed by his advisors about his own military's performance in Ukraine.
You know, I agree with that completely. When Putin started his escalation on the 24th of February 2022, he believed that his army would be met with embraces and flowers and all kinds of congratulations. And this is the information that Putin was receiving back in 2012, 2013, when a whole different Ukraine was there, when a lot of Ukrainians were actually thinking that Russia was a friendly nation, that Ukrainians and Russians were brothers and sisters. And all of that changed in 2014 was the bloody war which Russia has started in February 2014, 8 years ago. And since then, for 8 years, Ukrainians got clear on the fact that there can be no friendship with Russia, and that Russian and Ukrainians can at best live as neighbors. But it's the worst case scenario right now, and we have an enemy, we have a greedy neighbor who is attacking us day in, day out, who has been doing so for 8 years and who has no intent of stopping unless stopped.
And we saw a Red Cross warehouse, as you know, in central Mariupol was hit by at least 2 strikes, according to new satellite images. None of this surprises you, I'm sure.
No, it doesn't. And we have information of Russia targeting particularly petrol refineries and petrol storage units. That tells us that Putin is going in for the long run, and he's looking at a long-term war These are strategic targets that are being hit by Russia, and it means that they want to destroy Ukraine's supply of fuel, and they want to destroy it not for 1 day or 2 days, but they want to destroy it for months on end. And this means that Putin has no intention of drawing back, and you have to just see that he's targeting more and more civilian targets. None of the things that Russian missiles hit are actually military targets, and that's another sign saying that he's actually going in for the kill, and he's going in to destroy Ukraine and erase Ukrainians off the face of the earth.
Lucia Vasylenko, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's much more ahead tonight, including a look at the parallels between the war that we are seeing now and the wars that we have seen Vladimir Putin wage in all their brutality over the years. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper joins us for that. And later, Senator Angus King on what more he'd like to see this country do to help Ukrainians defend their country.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
There is an entire generation of young people who are spending every single day in the metaverse. Children today are conducting most of their socialization in metaverses like Fortnite and Minecraft and Roblox, and they expect something very different from the internet than the people who grew up in the Google and Facebook generation. They want to walk into immersive and video game-like environments that are interactive and social and meet their friends there and do all the things that you and I do on the internet, but in a very different format. And if companies want to start marketing to that generation that will soon have a lot of purchasing power, they're going to have to formulate a strategy and figure out how to build metaverse environments to attract customers there. It is highly risky and volatile, but it's also a really exciting time to be invested in this asset class. And more importantly, businesses are starting to understand how important it is to be in the metaverse.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally, this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
Whatever credence the Pentagon or Kremlin watchers may give the notion that Vladimir Putin's generals aren't telling him everything, it's hard to argue they aren't fighting the kind of war he wants, the way he wants it. The evidence of it is plain to see on the ground today in Ukraine and in the pages of history, his history. CNN's Matthew Chance explains.
Russian troops fresh from battle cruising through the devastated streets of a deserted city, virtually leveled by rockets and artillery fire. You can see the apartment blocks in the background reduced to rubble. It could easily be Ukraine in the past few weeks, but this is footage from 22 years ago in Chechnya, a breakaway Russian region brutally suppressed by the Kremlin. An early glimpse of how uncompromising Vladimir Putin would be.
The almost unanimous opinion of these soldiers is that if he's elected on Sunday, Vladimir Putin will make a strong president to lead this country and its armed forces.
At the time, he vowed to chase terrorists to the toilet and wipe them out in the outhouse. He later expressed regret for those words, but not the actions. Europe's first war of the 21st century was also Putin's war. The tiny Georgian enclave of South Ossetia was a backwater of the former Soviet Union. But it was here that Putin got a taste for violating international boundaries, intervening to support the breakaway region, pounding Georgian forces and rolling his tanks across the border.
Well, there's been a lot of speculation about where the Russian troops are. Well, here they are. Well, inside Georgian territory and outside the main conflict zone of South Ossetia. The big question is, how far will they go?
Then, as now, the invasion provoked international scorn. But just after the short Georgia war, Putin seemed confident relations with the West would endure.
Do you think that this is a turning point in relations between Russia and the West? Do you think that period of post-war calm has come to an end?
I think no. I hope no.
He was right. A Western backlash against a resurgent Russia never came. Until this. In 2014, protesters toppled a pro-Russian president in neighbouring Ukraine, and Putin moved quickly to secure Russian interests. Well, astonishing developments in Crimea, because without a shot being fired, Russia has moved into the Ukrainian territory and, despite international condemnation, effectively brought it under its control. Sanctions followed, but so too did an unstoppable wave of nationalism. President Putin, the victor of Crimea, had for many Russians restored a sense of pride.
We understand that it is not about the territory which we have enough of. It is about historical roots of our spirituality and statehood. It is about what makes us a nation and a united, unified nation.
Soon, Putin unleashed his growing military swagger even further afield. The shock and awe of Russian airstrikes in Syria propped up the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Each missile helping to change the course of the Syrian conflict and sending a potent message of Russian resurgence. Well, this really does feel like the centre of a massive Russian military operation. The air is filled with the smell of jet fuel, and the ground shudders with the roar of those warplanes returning from their bombing missions. Now the missiles and the roars are being heard once again. And Putin's destruction in Chechnya, then Georgia, then Syria, is now being visited on Ukraine. Of course, he's ridden out tough sanctions and international condemnation before. But this time, it's unclear how much support Putin has at home. This is one of those Russian Soviet-era vehicles which is completely burned out. And given painful Russian losses on the battlefield, it's unclear too whether he will now double down as he has in the past, or back down like never before. Matthew Chance, CNN.
Perspective now from CNN national security analyst James Clapper, retired Air Force Lieutenant General and former Director of National Intelligence. So, Director Clapper, I want to start with the news that U.S. officials tell CNN they believe Putin is being misinformed by his advisors about the reality of the war in Ukraine, the performance of his troops, even the impact of sanctions on the economy, that essentially his advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth. Do you, A, think that's likely? I know Tony Blinken was asked about it earlier, and he said he thinks that it is, essentially. And what does it say about how one moves forward then if he's not being informed?
Well, I think it's quite true. He, at least in my mind, he's not being well informed, and this is against the backdrop of his being essentially isolated for 22 years that he's ruled, and then physically isolated in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And we, recall the scenes of meeting people at the end of long tables and this sort of thing. And it's kind of typical of autocratic forms of government that information doesn't flow very well, neither up nor down the command chain. And I think the situation here is made worse by how badly things are going for the Russians in Ukraine and as well, and probably at home. So yeah, I doubt he's being informed about much. Now, he apparently knew enough to purge some people, but generally speaking, I don't think he's informed. Now, this is not good. This is dangerous when he's apparently still in a decision-making mode and is going to decide the way forward in Ukraine. And the thing is always on the back of my mind that he's got his button on the nuclear button there with the largest nuclear arsenal anywhere on the globe. So the fact that information is not flowing is not good from several dimensions.
We've mentioned the head of Britain's intelligence agency, GCHQ, said today that they've seen evidence that, quote, Russian soldiers short of weapons and morale, refusing to carry out orders, sabotaging their own equipment, even accidentally shooting down their own aircraft, which is stunning. You also, I don't know if you've heard, but those, the tapes, the radio communications that the New York Times has analyzed and which are available on the New York Times website are really fascinating, because you hear these Russian artillery and tank operators desperately calling out for air support, desperately, lacking food, lacking, coordinates, and they're operating on open frequencies that are being monitored by any Ukrainian citizen who is able to.
Yeah, as a lifelong intelligence guy, this is kind of amazing that armchair analysts at home can do their own signal intelligence. And, again, incredible that this level of communication security, or lack thereof, seems to be prevailing. And of course, that plays right into the Ukrainians' hands, because it makes it a lot easier for them to locate targets if the Russians are using cell phones and the like, or unencrypted communications to communicate with one another. So, this is kind of amazing. And, I've read reports of Russian soldiers attacking their own commanders, sabotaging vehicles, emptying the vehicles with getting rid of the gas. So this speaks to the really dismal state of affairs of the Russian military.
Yeah, Dr. James Clapper, I appreciate it. Thank you. Up next, lawmakers on Capitol Hill got a closed-door briefing this afternoon on the state of play in Ukraine. We'll talk to Senator Angus King, who was there.
I'm Natasha Bertrand at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and this is CNN.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
I'm Christiana Amanpour near Kyiv. This is CNN.
On Capitol Hill this afternoon, senators received a classified briefing on Russia's war in Ukraine. Independent Senator Angus King of Maine took part in it. He's just back from the region, a trip to Poland. Senator King serves on both the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee. I spoke to him earlier. Senator, appreciate you joining us. I know you can't reveal classified intelligence, obviously, but what are you able to say about the briefing you got today about the war and how it squares generally with the public perception of where things are headed?
Well, I think it was generally responsive to exactly what we're seeing, what you're reporting, Anderson, with a little more detail. But this is a crucial period that we're moving into now. The Russians do seem to be refocusing toward the east. And the danger is that they encircle the Ukrainian troops and squeeze them pretty substantially. And of course, the other danger is that Putin returns to his normal modus operandi of just hammering civilians in cities like he did in Aleppo with Assad and Grozny in Chechnya. And so the next 2 weeks are really going to be crucial to see if the Ukrainian forces can keep up the extraordinary level of fight that they have over the last several weeks. But we're getting the arms to them. That was a lot of the subject of the briefing today. We're getting humanitarian aid. Refugees are now over 4 million have left the country, 6 million displaced inside the country. 90% of those refugees are, I don't think 90%, but a very high percentage are children. So the situation right now is dangerous. Here's the irony, and here's the danger, Anderson. As the Ukrainians succeed and bring more pressure to bear, the danger is that Putin is more desperate and takes more desperate measures, either through more bombardment of the cities, through a cyber attack, or Lord help us, the use of nuclear weapons.
I'm wondering what you make of the reporting that U.S. intelligence believes that Vladimir Putin may not have been or is not getting full information about the details of the war by his military advisors. If that is the case, what does that suggest to you?
Well, it's really dangerous, and I think it's clearly the case. Either he got bad intelligence and has been getting bad intelligence all the way along, or he got good intelligence and didn't listen to it. I suspect it's a combination of both.
Do you put much stock in this claim of de-escalation? I mean, Russia's Ministry of Defense saying it's moving to drastically reduce forces around Kyiv. There's a lot of Ukrainians who believe this may be just an attempt to re-outfit, resupply whatever troops they have there.
Well, I think it's a little of both. I think what they made a fundamental mistake at the beginning of this war when they thought it was going to be a cakewalk. They divided their forces. Any general will tell you, you never divide your army. They divided their army essentially into 3 pieces, and now what they're doing is reconsolidating. They've decided they're not going to be able to take Kyiv, at least not now, and they're consolidating in the south and the west. One of Putin's strategic goals is a land bridge from Russia along the Black Sea to Crimea. And that's what's going on right now, is trying to ensure that. The other thing that we have to be concerned about, that the Ukrainians have to be concerned about, is that he traps them. He gets the Ukrainian forces down in that southeast corner and then encircles them and can just pound them with artillery and missile strikes. So The Ukrainians have to be very careful to not get trapped, obviously, but they do want to confront him and try to have the same kind of success they had up near Kyiv.
Yeah. Senator Angus King, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
There's evidence on the ground in Ukraine that the country's military could use more tools for this war. Those requests were being discussed today, as Senator King just mentioned. You'll see the needs in several cities, including in Mykolaiv in the south, where a Russian strike proved deadly today. More on that now from CNN's Ben Wiedemann.
Somewhere in this jumble of concrete, bricks, and twisted metal are more bodies, trapped in the ruins of the office of Mykolaiv's regional governor. Tuesday morning, a Russian missile struck the building, killing more than a dozen people, wounding many more.
They bombarded our city, and only civilians are dying here.
Mykolaiv Mayor Oleksandr Sienkiewicz doesn't normally come to City Hall like this, but he saw war coming long ago and prepared himself.
Starting from 2014, I thought that the war will be like this. So everything you see on me, these bulletproof vests, boots, anything, I bought it a couple years ago. So I started to learn how to shoot. I was in a special school for that.
On the outskirts of his city, recently downed Russian attack helicopters suggest the Ukrainian military also saw this war coming. They've managed to stop Russian forces in their tracks, regaining territory lost at the start of the war. 5-year-old Misha is recovering from shrapnel wounds to his head in the basement-turned-bomb shelter at Mykolaiv's Regional Children's Hospital. His grandfather Vladimir shows me phone video of the bullet-riddled car Misha's father was driving with his family to escape the Russian advance. Russian soldiers, Vladimir calls them bastards, opened fire on the car, killing Misha's grandmother and mother. As we speak, the air raid siren goes off. Taking shelter is an oft-practiced drill. Stay calm and carry on. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Mykolaiv.
Well, coming up, we're going to talk about the plight of the now more than 4 million refugees who fled Ukraine with Ambassador Cindy McCain.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
When you freeze fruits and vegetables, you actually help lock in nutrients, especially vitamin C. So if you've got extra fruit you might not eat right away, freezing is a great choice. In fact, you'll often get more nutrients out of the food if you freeze it when it's fresh than if you let the produce sit in your refrigerator. A University of Georgia study found that after 5 days, most fresh produce loses vitamin content, especially vitamin A, vitamin C, and folate. Freezing is a way to push the pause button. So keep your freezer full of fruits and veggies to enjoy in smoothies or as side dishes. And you don't have to do it yourself. Buying frozen fruits and vegetables is a healthy choice too. Frozen peas or spinach may contain more vitamin C than their counterparts that have been sitting in the produce section for days.
In China, no wallet, no problem. Here, using an app on your phone to make purchases is an everyday practice. The industry so far has been dominated by private companies. That could soon change. China's new digital currency, known as the Yiyuan, made headlines at the Winter Olympic Games, a centralized virtual form of currency that can be used just like money across the country.
I think the rollout at the Beijing Olympics is designed in some ways to show the flag internationally.
Other parts of the world have similar ambitions. The European Central Bank announced plans to create a digital version of the euro, aiming to achieve this milestone by 2026. The United States, the world's biggest economy, is currently in the research phase of its own digital dollar, but will not yet proceed, citing concerns around financial stability and privacy.
5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smerconish, Saturday on CNN.
I want to spend a few moments discussing the plight of Ukrainian refugees, particularly after that attack on a Red Cross facility in Mariupol that we mentioned earlier. Again, these are newly released satellite images from Maxar Technologies, and they show what Maxar says is at least 2 separate military strikes occurring during the last 11 days. No Red Cross staff were present. An ultra-nationalist militia, now part of the Ukrainian military, claims these were Russian military strikes. Just one more example of how difficult it is to help the most vulnerable during a war. Joining me now, someone who recently met with Ukrainian refugees while in Poland, Cindy McCain, the U.S. ambassador to the UN Food and Agriculture Agencies in Rome. Ambassador McCain, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get to what you're seeing firsthand in Eastern Europe, but first, I just wanted to get your reaction to the news that the Red Cross warehouse in Mariupol was hit by at least 2 strikes. I know you're not involved in military matters, but given what you and others are trying to do, how concerned are you about humanitarian facilities not being safe?
I'm very concerned about it. I mean, this has been the issue with having a corridor that's safe to be able to move humanitarian goods and, of course, people through. It's something that we've seen repeatedly coming out of Putin, and just these kinds of things, bombing buildings that are full of civilians, bombing areas like the IRC building that just occurred. It's tragic. I mean, the only way that we can stop this and that it can be stopped is for Putin to stop bombing and get out.
Yeah. You visited one of the refugee centers in Poland. What stood out to you? What did you see and hear?
Well, number one, I was astounded and my heart was lifted when I saw what the Polish people are doing for the Ukrainians. Yeah. It's an amazing operation, as you know. And it's something that they have withstood a huge influx of people, and they're doing it with great grace and dignity, and giving these people dignity, safety, and of course they're feeding them and making sure that they move forward with their plans as best they can.
All of those, refugees, internally displaced people as well, but need, not just food, medical supplies. Is there, you think, enough of a distribution system in place to make sure the relief is getting to where it's needed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're almost there. I mean, it's very difficult, especially when it's dangerous to move supplies into Ukraine. I think those who are coming out through Poland and some of the other countries, I think are certainly getting adequate care as best they can. I know the Poles are taking very good care of the refugees that are coming in. But there's a lot more to do. We have a crisis here that is now going to affect food systems around the world. Ukraine, as you know, is the largest bread basket in Europe, and it's going to affect other countries and other vulnerable people in our ability to be able to feed them. So this has long-lasting and worldwide implications.
Yeah, I mean, the ripple effects of this is something I think people have talked about a little bit, but it remains to be seen just how dire that might get with shortages of grain in the Middle East because of fields not being planted in Ukraine right now.
Right. Well, I just returned prior to this. It was a pre-planned trip from both Kenya and Madagascar, and we've already put them on 50% rations. Yemen's on 50% rations. Ethiopia may be less than 50% at this point. And I mean, these are people we're going to take food away from hungry children to give to starving children. What options is that? I mean, it's just an impossible event we're up against.
Yeah, it's a choiceless choice, as the expression goes. The other sort of unknown, of course, in all this is how long this goes on, and that must make planning really difficult.
Well, it is difficult. I mean, we have amazing UN organizations like World Food Program, FAOs in here, other organizations that are working very hard to be able to feed people and to be able to move what grain and substance out of Ukraine that we can. Again, the ports are closed, so we're having to hopefully put them on trains a bit, get it in trucks, get it out, and harvest it as well. So, I mean, this is a huge situation. This crisis is, as we just said, is worldwide. It has ripple effects, and it's going to affect us for a long time to come.
Yeah, Ambassador McCain, I'm so glad you had the time to speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to tell you a really incredible story next. It's about a family forced to flee their home in Kyiv, then separated from their father, but who found safety in the home of a stranger in the U.S. We have details on that when we come back.
I'm Paulo Sandoval in Bogota, Colombia, and this is CNN.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
The Breitling Navitimer was first introduced in 1952, and it is right up there among the most legendary aviation watches. It features a bezel with a logarithmic, double-rotating slide rule scale, and this slide rule can do a lot. With a quick glance of the wrist, it can indicate fuel consumption, climbing and sinking speeds, as well as average speeds. This is the brand of many dashboard clocks used in cockpits from models as famous as the Boeing 707. This watch has some very famous fans, including a pilot and movie star John Travolta. Not only does Travolta wear a Breitling Navitimer, his own dashboard instruments are also Breitling. So this is a watch with incredible credibility in the air, as well as having a very useful look on the wrist.
Today we live in an unpredictable environment and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I'm James Roby. I'm the Global Head of Environmental Sustainability at Capgemini. People often ask, why should businesses care about sustainability? Well, first of all, quite frankly, an unsustainable pathway is not going to be good for any business. Businesses are reliant on having consumers that will buy from them. They're reliant on having employees who want to work for them. Increasingly, all the stakeholders of the business are asking difficult questions. So businesses which aren't taking sustainability seriously essentially are going to be out of business. But in reality, it's never too late to start. A great way to start is by trying to understand your own impacts as an organisation. Perhaps calculate your carbon footprint. Ultimately, we need everybody on this journey. So why not start today?
Have you been bitten by the bug of curiosity? This is CNN 10. My name is Carl Azus. I'll be your explainer-in-chief.
Global news.
International relations are the key factors.
Relevant stories.
Everyday people whose action is changing their community.
Complex issues explained.
We're going back to the future.
And 10-second trivia.
You get a perfect 10 out of 10.
All in 10 minutes. Stream at cnn.com/CNN10.
Before the break, I was discussing the ripple effects of this war with Ambassador Cindy McCain. In that case, it was about food security, but another of those ripple effects, certainly a more encouraging one, is how Ukrainian refugees have been welcomed into the homes of strangers who want to do something to help. Randy Kay met one such family who found sanctuary at a home here in the United States.
I realized that something happened because when at 5:30 maybe a.m.,
the neighbors called me and asked, Irina, did you hear something? What happened?
Irina Tymoshenko was on a business trip last month in Lviv, Ukraine, near the Polish border, when Russia started bombing her country. Her husband and their 3 children were hundreds of miles away at the family's home outside Kyiv.
I just asked my husband to bring the kids to me.
Irina and her husband, Alexander, devised a plan. He would drive them through the night about 7 hours one way to meet her in Lviv.
So as your husband drove toward Lviv, you were able to track him on your phone?
In WhatsApp, it's the one option, share your location. And I can online check where he is. Because, you know, it was like the hardest hours when you realize that all your family, your husband and your kids driving. And it can bombing and it can be anything.
When the family reunited, Irina thought her husband wasn't able to cross the border since men of a certain age were being told to stay and help defend Ukraine. So Irina and her kids, ages 3, 7, and 9, boarded a train to Poland. Meanwhile, around the same time, half a world away, this man, Philip Bradford, was watching the Russian siege on TV at his Florida home. Philip's mother was Croatian, and his wife's stepmother was from Ukraine, so he felt the urge to help.
I heard my wife and my mother and my stepmother-in-law, my mother-in-law, telling me, get off of my dupa, which is rear end, and go do something.
Just a few minutes away from Philip's home in Cooper City is St. Nicholas Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
I went to the church and I gave them a couple of $100, thinking, I've done my good deed, like a Boy Scout might. And I said, if I can help more, let me know.
Turns out there was more, a lot more. Irina had made her way to Miami with her kids. She'd visited that same Ukrainian church last year. So when she went back and shared her struggle, a church volunteer called on Philip to help.
I was told about this mother with 3 children from Ukraine.
And he told, yes, I want to help. I have the big house. I want to give you the place to stay for your kids. You will have the separate room for all of them.
Philip's wife has been in a nursing home for the last 4 years, so he's been living alone. Not anymore. Irina and her kids moved right in.
I'm almost 80, so it's like having grandkids running around again.
How do you feel about a stranger opening up his home to your family?
You know, I was shocked. And now we are like one family all together.